Right, brilliant.
Okay, cool. Okay, well, hello and welcome to one of our lovely live workshops as part of the NestFest 2020 Youth Arts Festival. My name is Meg and I am the organiser of NestFest 2020. It's lovely to see you all here today. This workshop is a textile workshop led by the lovely Genevieve Rudd, and it's called Wear Your Heart on Your Sleeve. And Genevieve will tell you more about what is involved in a minute. But just to say, Genevieve is a community artist based in Galston, which is in East Norfolk. She's worked on lots of lovely projects with the community, with schools, with young people, all kinds of different groups. So it's really lovely to have Genevieve with us here today. So thank you, Genevieve. I'm going to pass over to you.
Thanks, Meg. So lovely to be part of NestFest. I was part of the last couple of years, so it's always lovely to come back to something and work in a new way. So who'd have thought we'd be working like this? But so this session is called Wear Your Heart on Your Sleeves, and it's about turning your passions, things that you're interested in, you know, the things that drive you in your life, your beliefs, into a textile patch, a patch made of fabric that you could then stitch onto your jacket or your bag or wherever you want to wear it, so you can kind of show people this is what I'm all about, and this is what I believe in through the medium of textiles. So I'm now going to share the screen, and I've got a little slideshow just to kind of give a bit of inspiration and a bit of an introduction into the things that could help you develop your ideas. So here we are, a little bit of workshop inspiration. So wear your heart on your sleeve. Okay, so this method of working, so when we work with craft techniques, in this case it's fabrics and textiles and hand sewing, and we use it to speak about things that we feel passionate about, so a method of activism. If you blend the two words together, it's craftivism. So craft and activism is craftivism, and that's the technique we use. So it's a way of communicating things that are really important to us, but through a particular kind of technique. And it's actually quite a quiet way. So if you think about activism, you might think about protests, and that being, you know, people in groups on the street, you know, very kind of physical, loud presence. This type of activism is quite a quiet way to express what you mean. So it's the same passion, the same messages and the same beliefs, but channeled in a different way. And so if you're a little bit more of a kind of introverted personality like me, you know, I quite like to think about things. I like to, you know, kind of channel what I do in a different way. Then this is the kind of way for you. So it complements big things like protests, but it's just delivered in a different kind of way. So thinking about what we could put on a textile patch, things that interest us, things that we're passionate about. So I thought about there could be different themes. So we could think about people, we could think about places, and we could think about protests, which I've mentioned earlier. So thinking about people, thinking about you know, human rights and movements. So things like LGBTQ plus movements like Black Lives Matter, and on the bottom left example, that's Marcus Rashford, who is supporting children to access free school meals. So we could think about individuals, so kind of heroes, but we could also think about movements, so things like Black Lives Matter. Thinking about places, so you'll see on the middle group of pictures, that's a campaign about fracking, which is a way of extracting natural gases from the environment. So it's like a fossil fuel type method. And actually that's something that the British public have tended to be very against. So that's the kind of thing that would affect a place environmentally. And on the right of that, that's a picture of coastal erosion in Suffolk. So, you know, thinking about the place you live is a really good place to start when you're thinking about, you know, what is my passion, what is my cause. Often your local community is a really good place to start. And on the bottom right, you'll see a little picture of bees in wildflowers. So thinking about the environment, you know, maybe it's maybe saving the bees is something you're really passionate about access to green spaces, natural environments. So there's lots of things that we could really get stuck into, and these ideas are absolutely not exclusive. There's tons of things that we could channel into our textile patches. Or we could think about, you know, protest as a source, you know, that's really kind of big and bold, but we could channel it into our quiet textiles. So thinking about turning it into textiles, so turning those big ideas, so big social movements, you know, big things that are happening to our planet, things that are affecting people in our local community or all around the world, to turn that into textiles. A good way of thinking about it is simplifying it into looking at words and looking at symbols. So thinking about slogans that are used in different movements. So these could be contemporary things, like on the bottom left, you can see there is no planet B, so a slogan that's used in environmental movements. So think about people like Greta Thunberg, those climate protests. And in the middle, you'll see a phrase, votes for women. So, you know, this goes way back, you know, that was 100 years ago. The suffragettes, you know, they really knew how to use words and symbols and slogans, and they had like a really strong colour scheme to show their beliefs. So we could think about the words that are used in social movements and also the symbols. So there's the kind of fist symbol for Black Lives Matter, the peace symbol, which is, you know, really kind of old symbol for kind of peaceful movements, and then more modern symbols, like on the right there, you've got Extinction Rebellion, which is like a really iconic logo. So these are things we could use in our textiles. And here's some example of some phrases that are that have been used in a group that I run in Great Yarmouth called Say It With Stitch. And we turn slogans into little stitch patches, and then we hang them up in places. Obviously a little bit tricky right now with COVID, but we've been going for a couple of years, and we did hang our banners up in shop windows, or make things that people could wear, or put them onto bags. So you can see it says "Be the Change." Someone had just started sewing one there called "Love Bees," "Love the Place You Live," and "Let's Turn the Tide on Litter." So those are some examples of pieces that are made by local people. And here's some examples of some craftivism, some patches, bigger patches, and then on the right, kind of small wearable patches that are made by other movements all across the world. So some contemporary pieces. So on the left, a really kind of positive, uplifting earth banner, so all about the natural world, and we've that's a really, really beautiful image. And then in the middle, love is justice, justice is love. So thinking about those slogans being really, really punchy. And then on the right is sort of some feminist phrases, so things about gender equality and rights. So these are international examples, and this is what we're going to be taking inspiration from this evening. I'm going to stop that share. So loads and loads of ideas there, and yeah, it's sometimes it's quite hard to choose, but you might, you know, be looking through that thinking, yeah, this is, you know, there's something there. Maybe it's you know, the LGBTQ plus, that could be like the rainbow flag with the Black Lives Matter. It could be the BLM or the fist, or if you're really into kind of environmentalism, it could be maybe a world, or the bees, the bee campaign. So there's lots of things that you can kind of think about, you know, what is it that I'm really passionate about? What means something to me? And then picking out the kind of slogans and words and the symbols, and stitching that onto a piece of fabric and then wearing it with pride. So what we're going to do is you're going to have a moment to do a little drawing of a design, and what I would suggest is keeping it really simple. And thinking about the textiles that you've got, so I've got here lots of different scraps of fabric. So all different types. Some of them are quite kind of thick, some of them are kind of cotton. I've got a bit of felt, I've got, you know, all sorts here. So when we're starting to design, we want to think about what scale we want to have it at. So what size do we want the final thing to be? If we're thinking about decorating a whole tote bag, then of course, you know, we might want it to be, you know, quite kind of large. If we're thinking about something that's just a kind of small patch that we put on a jacket, then we probably want something maybe like the size of our palm, so a little bit smaller. So think about when you're designing, you know, you want to keep it really nice and simple, maybe a really short phrase. So think back to those suffragettes, you know, votes for women, it just says it, you know, just like that, really, really clear. Or, you know, if you prefer, go for a symbol. So if you've got your pencil and pen at the ready, then what we can do is think about some designs. And yeah, I think simplicity is the key. So when you're designing, also think about the scale. So whilst you're drawing your phrase, your slogan, or your image, I'm just going to have a flick through. I've got this book called Craftivism, and it's by someone called Betsy Greer. And Betsy Greer, she coined the phrase craftivism in 2003. So whilst she didn't start it off, because textiles has always been a method for communicating things that people feel passionate about, you know, things like the suffragettes, things like trade union banners, quilts all around the world that talk about Indigenous people's experiences. Betsy Greer was the person who founded the kind of word of it. She put a word to what this method is. So whilst you're doing your design or thinking of what your slogan can be, I'm going to just look through here, see if there's any examples which might be useful. But the most important thing is just to keep it really simple, because obviously the more, you know, the bigger the design, the more you have to stitch, and you know, we want it to be you know, nice kind of strong impact. So let me have a look if there's any good examples to share. Okay, so just while you're thinking about your own design, here's a page which is on suffragettes. So it's a contemporary version of suffragette phrases and people who are featured, and you can see that the little shapes are like little flags, so the scale is quite small and the words are quite simple, but that's a really nice way. So this is again in the Craftivism book. So it's kept really nice and simple. So it's thinking about this is part of International Women's Day, and it's a tribute to women whose triumphs and achievements were often unacknowledged. So using the suffragette colours, which was cream, green and purple, but talking about contemporary women. So think about what you can do. So for my design, I think I'm going to do a tree, because I read an article today about the health benefits of trees being in urban areas and places where people live, and how it, you know, makes people feel happier and healthier and has an impact on people's well-being. So I'm going to have a go at a tree. So you might want to put your design in a square. So you go, so this is an A4 piece of paper, so you can just to see the scale. And I'm just in the corner there, so just to see the scale, there's my hand for scale. You can see my tree is in a small corner of the page. So I'm thinking that would probably work quite well as something to wear, or it could go on a tote bag, but that's the scale I'm working at. So yeah, so keep it nice and simple, whether you're doing it as a phrase or a word, or just one symbol. And what you can do is you can either, if you've got access to some scissors, you could cut that out and use it as a paper template, or you could just copy your design onto another piece of fabric. So think of the bit on your paper as like the test design, and then with your fabric you're doing like the kind of final design. So I've got a little piece of fabric here which is sort of just bigger than the palm of my hand, but it fits within my hand, and that's the scale I'm going to be working at. I've got a tape measure ruler here just to give you an idea of the scale I'm working at. So I've got 11 centimeters by 12 centimeters, and that's how big my patch is. But your patch, as I say, if you're going for a bag design, you know, you want to go bigger. If you want something quite subtle, you'll go for something smaller. But my piece of fabric that I'm going to work on, yeah, that looks about right, Meg. Yeah, that looks good. So yeah, about 11 by 12 centimeters. So that feels like a good size for most things. So what I'd like you to do is to finish off your design. Remember, keep it really simple. Is it a slogan or a phrase from a movement? Is it one that you've made up? Is it a really simple picture or a symbol? So is it a symbol of a movement that you'd recognise, you know, like the Extinction Rebellion, which is the circle with the kind of cross through it, which looks like a kind of a counting down time? Or is it the peace sign? Is it you know, rainbow flag, for example? Or is it something that represents something? So like with my one, I've got a tree to represent, for me, the importance of trees, importance for our health, the importance for our environment, and that's what I'm going to be working on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out my design. So I'm going to cut around my tree shape. So if you've got scissors, you can cut around your tree shape. And if not, what you'll do is, using your pencil or pen, draw directly on the fabric to make your design, and I will guide you through that next step. So if you have a pair of scissors, then I'd like you to cut out your design just to help you as a paper template. But if you haven't, then that's fine, because we can just draw directly onto the fabric to cut it out. So either way is fine. I'm just going to get mine cut so I can show you. Oops. Right, so there we go. So there's my tree design. So I've cut it out a piece of paper just for scale. It fits in the palm of my hand, so I'm going quite small. So I'd like you to, if you've got some scissors, cut out the same thing. So whatever your design is, there we go. So we can use that as our paper template. What this now means is that you could then stick it on your piece of fabric, whatever you choose. You could hold it against it and then draw around it, and it just helps you. Let me just see if I've got a better contrast. Have a rummage in my fabric box, see if I've got a better colour. So if I've got trees, I like green. It just depends on what fabric you've got, really, what colours you've got. As I say, all these are recycled, so they're all sorts of scraps from various past projects. So it depends on what you've got. There we go. Right. So I've got my piece of fabric. This was a tea towel from a charity shop, which was 50p, that I've been cutting out of for lots of different projects. And I'm going to get my paper template, and I'm going to hold it against my fabric where I want to include the design. So you can see on this tea towel has got a bit of checkerboard on one side and a bit of green, so I'm going to hold it against the green. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw around, so that'll help me get the exact design that I want in the exact size that I want as well. So if you've got your scissors and you've cut out your paper template, then go ahead and do the same. So get your pencil and then draw around. And if you haven't, just copy the drawing that you've done onto your fabric directly. Okay, so let's start getting the fabrics together now. So you'll have one piece of fabric which will be your background, and then depends on what your design is, you'll have other bits of fabric to make your design. Okay, so far we've got 2 pieces of fabric on the go. And if you're doing lettering, you could do every letter could be a different colour. You know, you could be quite creative with it. So, and it depends what colours you've got, what you've got access to. I think I might need a pen to go down mine. So it doesn't particularly matter what kind of fabric you've got, but if you've got a fabric that's quite, you know, solid, like not really silky fabrics are difficult to work with, but kind of thicker fabrics tend to be quite good to work with. So depends on what you've got, but it can all work. It's just silky fabrics can just be really tricky. If you've ever watched The Sewing Bee, it's sort of, you know, it's a dreaded when they start getting the slippery fabrics out, that's, you know, that's when everyone starts groaning. So all right, so the stage I'm at, you might be at the same. So I've got my paper template, I've put it on my piece of fabric, and I've drawn around in pen, and you can see there I've got a tree on my piece of fabric, and I'm going to cut that out. Okay, so I'd like you to do the same. So you'll have a paper design. If you can cut it out, you'll use it as a template. And if not, you'll just draw straight on your fabric, whatever your design is, and then we'll cut it out. And so you can be quite clever at this stage, you know, thinking about what colours you want, thinking about what designs of fabric, how you layer it up. And it can be really unique, because if you've got access to you know, lots of different styles of fabric through recycling, then yeah, it'll be completely unique. I'm just cutting my tree out. Okay. So if you've got lettering, it might take you a while to cut out. And that's fine. And the thing about textiles is that actually sometimes, you know, it might not be something we can just achieve in an hour. It might not be something that we can do, you know, just as quick as that. Actually, sometimes this does actually take time. So, you know, don't worry if you don't finish in this session, because it's something that can build over time. So you can go back to it, and it's quite a nice kind of chilled out thing to do anyway. So so yeah, feel free to revisit it at a different time. So the stage I'm at is I've got my tree is now a piece of fabric. So cut out the old tea towel, 50p well spent, and then I've got my background fabric, which is 11 by 12 centimeters, but whatever you've got, and then you can see how it's now going to come together. So if I hold my tree against my patch, you can see there how it's going to come together. And depending if you've got lettering or you've got a logo, a slogan, a design, you might have more than one piece. But if you've just done one shape, then you can keep it really simple like that. But you can go as detailed or as simple as you like. It's entirely up to you. Depends on your style, depends on, you know, the message. Different things are kind of appropriate for different messages. So, you know, feel free to keep it simple, but also, you know, don't hold back if you want to have loads of different kind of patterns of fabric, different shapes, all mixed up together. Okay, so this technique, when you get one shape of fabric and you stitch it onto another piece of fabric, this is called a plique, and it's a technique that's really, really old. I don't have a date for it, but it's just a really established technique for textiles. And it's a really good practical technique as well, because say if you had a hole in your jumper, you could use a plique to patch it up. So you could cut out, you know, a square of fabric, put it over the hole of your hole in your jumper, and you could stitch around it and you can use it to patch it up. So it can look, you know, attractive. We can use it for decorative reasons. We can use a plique for activism, but you can also use a plique for practical things like repairing your clothes. So it's a good technique to know. So once you're at this stage, you've got a shape or letters. You can see that what we're going to do is we're going to stitch the shape onto the background. So I'm just going to get my needle and threads. And so this is always the tricky bit when you've got to thread the needle on camera, but fortunately I've got some thread already in the needle. There we go. So there we go, there's one I threaded earlier. So there's some threads there, and I'm just gonna talk you through the threads actually whilst we're onto that bit. So you might have these kind of fine little thread bobbins like this. So these are really, really thin, and sometimes they're used for, you put it in a sewing machine. You might have this if you've got a sewing kit, like a sewing emergency repair kit, you might have thread like this. And so this is really fine and it's less noticeable than, for example, if in your sewing kit you had things like this, which are embroidery floss. So these are multi-strand. You can see that they're much thicker, much chunkier. And if you were using thread like this, they would be more visible. So it depends on what you've got access to. You could make a choice about your design. You know, do you want thick, chunky thread like this? Or do you want this kind of thin, subtle thread like this? And so it kind of depends on what you want to do. And if you're going for the thin thread, it will make the fabric design stand out. And if you're going for the thicker thread, the thread kind of becomes part of the design because it's more visible. So it's entirely up to you what you want to choose. Depends on what you've got and depends on, again, what your style is. So I'm just using whatever's on my needle already. So just out of laziness, there we are. So I'm going to knot the end of my thread. So what I'd like you to do is thread your needle. And I tend to go for an arm's length of thread. It tends to be like a good amount to just kind of stretch your arm out. A good sort of arm's length is normally enough. Yeah, that looks good. Yeah, so that's normally about enough. I found that that is long enough so you can stitch for a good amount of time, but not too long to get tangled. And then I'm going to tie a knot in one of the ends of thread. And then that is going to be like the stopper at the back so it doesn't unravel. So you might be able to just see there's a knot there at the end of the thread. So just a little bit right close to the end. I've put two knots on top of each other and it makes a nice bulk, okay? And that's on the longer bit. And then just hanging out the needle, you've got a kind of shorter bit of thread there. And the longer bit has got the knot on the ends. So double knotted, so it makes a nice chunky bit there. And then the kind of shorter bit is like a little tail that just hangs like that. Okay, so then we're ready to get stitching. So you might have in your emergency repair kit or in your sewing kit, you might have some little needles which have got little sort of plastic or glass little circles on the end. So you could use those to pin your work down if you've got them. It helps, but it's not essential. So if you've got your needle and thread and you've got the longer bit has got the knot on the back, on the end there, so you've got the longer bit just going to flow down there. We're going to go in from the back of the work. And so what I mean by that is I've got my tree on the top, and then I've got my background, and then from the background I'm going to poke the needle through so that the needle's coming up through the front of the work. And then when I pull it all the way, and you'll notice the same on yours, because you've got a knot there, it's kept it really nicely in place, and the knot just stops it from the work unraveling. And then you can just go down. So because the thread is coming up from the front of the work, you then poke the needle down from the front of the work and pull it out the back. So whatever end the thread is coming out from, that's where you put the needle through. So now the thread's coming out the back, I poke the needle up through the back. And if we carry on with this stitch, this is called a run-in stitch, and it's really easy peasy, and it's quite simple, but it could look quite effective. So for example, you could make the gaps quite big if you want them to look quite dramatic. You can make them really small, you could vary the size, you could do them quite close together, you can do them far apart. It all adds to the design. So there we go. And what I'm going to do, bless you.
Sorry.
I'm going to do my running stitch all the way around, and what that is doing is attaching my tree to my background patch. And if you've got lots of lettering, you'll do each letter separately, and if you've got just one piece of fabric like me, you can just go all the way around the edge. And so I'm not sure if the camera will pick it up, but you might be able to just see there I've got a dashed line going around my tree, and it's just starting to come together. So I'm going to carry on, and if your thread starts to get really short, don't worry. I'm about to come to that stage as well where I need to swap my thread, but I'll show you what we do when that happens. So how we finish off the thread. And the important thing is to not leave yourself like no space to kind of work with the needle. So don't stop right at the end of the thread. Leave yourself a little gap, maybe kind of a thumb's length of thread left, and then we can swap over. So just go round and round your shape with your running stitch. Pretty instantly with the applique technique. So one shape on another shape of fabric, you can get quite an instant impact, and it starts to build up a design really quickly, even if it is a simple design. It's quite effective. Okay, so I'm now coming to a stage where my thread's getting quite short. So what I'll do is I'll show you how to finish that off. Okay. So what I'm going to do is make sure that when I am doing the finishing off, that I've poked my needle in from the front so that it's hanging out the back. Okay, so that's the front of my design, and because my thread's got way too short, you can see there's not much thread left at all. I'm going to hang it out of the back. Okay, so you're always working on the back of the work when you're doing the finishing off, and then I'll tell you what we need to do. So if you're at that stage, you need to look back at the last stitch that you did, and we're going to just poke the needle under that last stitch to make a little loop. So you can just see there's a little loop, and then with the loop we're going to poke the needle through the loop. So what it is creating a knot. I'm going to just say that again. So as we're finishing off, we're coming to the end of our thread. We'll make sure that the thread is hanging out the back of the work. When we turn it over, looking at the back, we'll go to our last stitch that we did. We poke our needle through to make a little loop. And then with that loop, we then just stick the needle through the loop. And I do that twice. And what that does is make a little knot. And that means that I can then cut my thread off. And then it's all finished off. I haven't quite finished sewing, so I'm going to need to get some more thread to finish off the side of my design. So hopefully you can see how simple it is, but actually how, you know, you could really spend quite a long time doing this, and thinking about those examples that I showed you. You know, you could probably appreciate the kind of hours that have gone into it, and you know, the time if you want something quite detailed, or if you're working on quite a large scale. You know, these things do take time, so, and they're worth it, you know, and every stitch that you do, you know, thinking about your message and why it's so important to you. It's a nice time for reflection. Okay, so I'm coming to a point with my tree that I'm nearly sewn all the way around the edge, but you might be at a different stage depending on you know, how confident or comfortable you are with sewing, or depending on how tricky your design is. But I'm gonna finish sewing on my tree, and then I'm going to think about the details I want to add. So for the last 20 minutes, let's think about ways that we can work on our patch and think about where our patch could go. So I'm just doing my little trick to finish off the end of the thread on the back of the work. So if you're thinking about what to do with your patch, so you could, when you finish, you know, it could go quite nicely on a jacket. It could go quite nicely on a tote bag. But also thinking about something that we now have to wear every day we go out is a face mask. So, you know, this could be a way that you could customize your face mask by having something that you know, is really important to you, you know, whatever that is, whatever that thing is that you're passionate about, you could have that, you know, stitched across the mouth of your face mask, and that could make it really unique, really personalized, but also, you know, talk a lot about you and your identity. So just to show you an example, so I've got a different book here. So this one's called Strange Material, and it's by Leanne Prain, and she's also written books about yarn bombing. So, you know, if you ever go out and you see lamp boxes, lampposts and post boxes decorated with like knitted panels all around them. She wrote a book about that, so she is really into that. So she calls it yarn bombing and knit graffiti as well. That's kind of a phrase that she uses. So in this book, there is an example by someone called Sarah Corbett. So going back to that phrase, craftivism, so craft and activism, and Sarah Corbett is a really big craftivism person, creative, and I met her at the UEA, and that was really cool. She did a talk there, and she a few years ago made these face masks with messages on. Now, you know, obviously she had no idea that we'd all be wearing them every day. So she's, you know, obviously well ahead of the curve, but you should just be able to see there. So there's like a stitched message on a face mask. So that could be a really cool idea to, you know, customize, make it your own. And there's another. So she says, create your own protest statement. So use metaphors, symbols, quotes, stories, alliterations, and rhythms so that your message stays in people's heads and keeps them thinking and talking. So yeah, so it's kind of a way of kind of provoking thoughts, sharing what you're all about through the medium of face masks, which is pretty cool, and pretty relevant as well, you know, pretty kind of topical. We'll all probably be wearing face masks for a while, you know, why not customize it and make it something that speaks about you and your life and what you're into. So if you kind of did research into craftivism, you'd find lots of knitting. So I'm just going to show some examples of that. So different to what we're doing, but that's often quite a kind of common way of expressing what people think. Let me see if I can find a good example. So you might not quite be able to see, but this is an example of yarn bombings, and it says teens knit too on something that looks like it's kind of maybe gone on a lamppost. So yeah, it's really simple messages, simple materials, old techniques, you know, like we're doing now, hand sewing, really old technique. Is knitting, you know, it's kind of classically a kind of a thing that's you know, seen as something that grannies do, but yeah, on this post here it says teens knit too. So yeah, it can be cool. They said it in a book, so there we are. And thinking about garments, thinking about, you know, if we were going to make this patch to decorate something that we want to wear, so we're really kind of showing the world, you know, this is what I'm about. This is an example by someone called Paddy Hartley, and he looked at stories like military stories and military history and created some works on the Great War. So I'm just going to show you. So this is a garment that's decorated with pictures and stories, which is pretty cool. And so, you know, you can really make an impact when you use images and you use text to decorate garments. And quite a good, you know, way of thinking about heritage and thinking about stories and showing them through garments. So if you look up craftivism, you'll just be, you know, blown away at the ways that people have been creative. And I would say take inspiration from that. Don't feel overwhelmed by it. And I think a good way to start is to really start simple, you know, just like we're doing here, a little patch, a little bit of scrap of textile, something that means something really important to us can be just as impactful as, you know, those big garments and those big, you know, banners. You know, the thing about craftivism and sewing in this way is it's really important that the message is there, and we believe in what we're stitching, because it takes time to sew, and we want to spend the time sewing something that actually means something to us. If not, why bother spending the time unless it does truly mean something. So I've got my little tree on my floral fabric there, and I'm going to add a flower, because why not? I think trees and flowers go together. So I'm just going to get a little bit of fabric, and you only need a little bit, because actually a little bit can go quite far. And if you're quite into your textiles projects, then you might find that you get lots of scrappy bits. If you were working on a bigger project and you collect all those little bits of scraps, well, this can be a good way of scrap busting, getting rid of all those little offcuts, and creating something which can recycle that, but also means something important to us. So I'm just going to cut out my flower. So feel free. So at this stage, you might have cut out your main shape, and you might have done your running stitch all the way around it. Or if you're working on lettering, you might just be part of the way through, because obviously lettering takes a little bit longer. But feel free to just do the same technique again. So the applique technique, cut out another shape, or you could use the sewing technique to stitch some lettering on. So you can make it completely your own, make it really unique, and add as much or as little as you like. Right, there we go. I've just got my little flower shape, and I'm going to put it onto my tree somewhere, maybe down the bottom. And then if you've got things like buttons, or you've got beads, if you had that sort of thing, you can add a little bit of flourish. But if not, just all fabrics is quite nice, quite effective. So depends on what you've got and how fancy you want to go with it. And also, as we've got Christmas coming up, you could make it into a little patch for someone. If someone's really into something, then this could be a really nice personalised gift. You could put a safety pin on the back to turn it into a little brooch. So yeah, you could, or customise something. So yeah, it could always be a gift as well. I'm sure it would be really warmly received. Okay, so we've got just over 5 minutes left. So chance to get those last stitches on. Thinking about, why this thing means something to us, why we chose the design, and also thinking about what's the life of the little piece of fabric going to be. So where's it going to go? What are we going to stitch it onto? Is it going to be given to someone? Are we going to put it on something wearable? Is it going to go on a bag? Is it going to go on a pencil case? Where's it going to go afterwards? And if you've done just a shape, you might want to add some lettering on, or if you've done just a slogan or lettering, you might want to add a shape on. or you could do multiple patches. So there's lots of ways you could develop. And as I said, textiles, it's, you know, these kind of techniques, this sewing technique, so using a running stitch and this applique technique are really handy, really universal. You could repair your clothes with it. You could also make some really lovely designs using just these simple techniques. So they're really good to know. But don't worry if, you know, we're kind of starting to come to a close, but don't worry if you haven't finished, because as I said at the beginning, you know, these things do take time. You know, looking at those examples we looked at, you know, sometimes people work on things for, you know, days and weeks and months and years. So, you know, don't feel worried if you haven't finished, because it's fine. These things do take time. Right, so we've got a few more minutes left. So what we've been doing is using a running stitch and a applique. But if you look up on YouTube, you can get loads of sewing tutorials for loads of different styles of stitching, so that you can make it, you know, really kind of fancy. And if you want to learn something new, then there's some really good tutorials on YouTube for trying out different stitching styles. But equally, you know, the kind of simpler techniques, you can still be really varied with it if you're you know, quite creative with you know, how you apply the different approaches. Okay, so I'm just finishing off my flower that I've put on the corner, and I'm going to finish off the thread by looping it through the last stitch and then looping it through the loop that makes, and doing that twice, and then you can cut off the thread. Okay, so I've got my my tree with my little flower on there, and I think you could do with a button or something. I think it might need a button just to kind of pick out the middle of the flower, I think. And I might put the slogan on it, "Save the trees," maybe, or I don't know, I might look up some good phrases from environmental protests. So I think sometimes I quite like to look at photos from protests, you know, thinking about environmental protests, to get some really good slogans, because sometimes there's some quite funny ones and some quite witty ones. The things that people put on their, you know, their banners, they can be quite a good source of inspiration as well. So I might try and find the right message to go on my tree. So I'm quite a fast sewer, but don't worry if you're not as quick as me. It does take time. I'm quite sort of speedy with my needle, but don't worry. Okay, so just to kind of recap what we've been doing. So we've been thinking about craftivism, so craft and activism, where we think about the thing that means something most to us. You know, what do we believe in? What are we passionate about? Is it something to do with people? Is it something to do with places? Is it the sorts of things that people protest about? We've picked out some slogans or some logos or some simple shapes and pictures to represent that. We made a paper template and we cut it out and we turned it into a fabric patch, and we used a running stitch, and we used a technique called applique, which is where we take one shape of fabric and sew it onto another. Yeah, so I hope you've enjoyed doing that. I hope it's given some inspiration for future sewing projects.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Genevieve. That was absolutely fabulous. I'm just going to show my patch. It's absolutely terrible, and I'm trying to say people, not objects, because
I love it.
I'm quite
good for you. That's amazing.
I'm quite passionate about making sure people are people and not objects. My writing hasn't gone very well.
I can see
people
looks good.
All different. Yeah. And I've not done very much sewing before, but I love the fact that it's so mindful. Like, it's such a lovely way to just think about nothing else except what you're doing.
Yeah, 100% agree.
It's just such a lovely little bit of time for yourself. I can really recommend doing that for mindfulness. Anyway, unfortunately, we are out of time today, but I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. I'd love to see any pictures of your beautiful creations, so do please put them on Facebook if you've got any. We'd love to see them, or our Instagram page as well. And I just want to say thank you so much to Genevieve again for having us this evening.
Thank you, Genevieve. That was great. Love that.
Oh, thank you. It's a real pleasure. Yeah.
Take care.
Oh, thank you.
All right. See you later, everyone.
Bye, everyone.